The weather side of every rope, spar, and stay was coated with ice, while all the rigging was a harp, singing and shouting under the fierce hand of the wind. The schooner hove to, lurched and floundered through the sea, rolling her scuppers under and perpetually flooding the deck with icy salt water. We of the forecastle stood in sea boots and oilskins. Our hands were mittened, but our heads were bared in the presence of the death we did not respect. Our ears stung and numbed and whitened, and we yearned for the body to be gone. But the interminable reading of the burial service went on. The captain had mistaken his place, and while he read on without purpose, we froze our ears and resented this final hardship thrust upon us by the helpless cadaver. As from the beginning, so to the end, everything had gone wrong with the bricklayer. Finally, the captain's son, irritated beyond measure, jerked the book from the palsied fingers of the old man and found the place. Again the quavering voice of the captain arose. Then came the cue. "And the body shall be cast into the sea." We elevated one end of the hatch cover, and the bricklayer plunged outboard and was gone. Back into the forecastle we cleaned house, washing out the dead man's bunk and removing every vestige of him. By sea law and sea custom, we should have gathered his effects together and turned them over to the captain, who later would have held an auction in which we should have bid for the various articles. But no man wanted them. So we tossed them up on deck and overboard in the wake of the departed body, the last ill treatment we could devise to wreak upon the one we had hated so. Oh, it was raw, believe me, but the life we lived was raw, and we were as raw as the life. The bricklayer's bunk was better than mine, less sea water leaked down through the deck into it, and the light was better for lying in bed and reading. Partly for this reason I proceeded to move into his bunk. My other reason was pride. I saw the sailors were superstitious, and by this act I determined to show that I was braver than they. I would cap my proved equality by a deed that would compel their recognition of my superiority. Oh, the arrogance of youth! But let that pass. The sailors were appalled by my intention. One and all, they warned me that in the history of the sea no man had taken a dead man's bunk and lived to the end of the voyage. They instanced case after case in their personal experience. I was obdurate. Then they begged and pleaded with me, and my pride was tickled in that they showed they really liked me and were concerned about me. This but served to confirm me in my madness. I moved in, and lying in the dead man's bunk all afternoon and evening, listened to dire prophecies of my future. Also were told stories of awful deaths and gruesome ghosts that secretly shivered the hearts of all of us. Saturated with this, yet scoffing at it, I rolled over at the end of the second dog watch and went to sleep. At 10 minutes to 12 I was called, and at 12 I was dressed and on deck, relieving the man who had called me. On the sealing grounds, when hove to, a watch of only a single man is kept through the night, each man holding the deck for an hour. It was a dark night, though not a black one. The gale was breaking up and the clouds were thinning. There should have been a moon, and though invisible in some way, a dim suffused radiance came from it. I paced back and forth across the deck amidships. My mind was filled with the event of the day and with the horrible tales my shipmates had told, and yet I dare to say here and now that I was not afraid. I was a healthy animal, and furthermore, intellectually, I agreed with Swinburne that dead men rise up never. The bricklayer was dead, and that was the end of it. He would rise up never, at least never on the deck of the Sophie Sutherland. Even then he was in the ocean depths, miles to windward of our leeward drift, and the likelihood was that he was already portioned out in the maws of many sharks. Still my mind pondered on the tales of the ghosts of dead men I had heard, and I speculated on the spirit world. My conclusion was that if the spirits of the dead still roamed the world, they carried the goodness or the malignancy of the earth life with them. Therefore, granting the hypothesis, which I didn't grant at all, the ghost of the bricklayer was bound to be as hateful and malignant as he in life had been. But there wasn't any bricklayer's ghost. That I insisted upon. A few minutes thinking thus, I paced up and down. Then, glancing casually forward along the port side, I leaped like a startled deer, and in a blind madness of terror rushed aft along the poop, heading for the cabin. Gone was all my arrogance of youth and my intellectual calm. I had seen a ghost. There, in the dim light, where we had flung the dead man overboard, I had seen a faint and wavering form. 6 feet in length it was, slender, and of substance so attenuated that I had distinctly seen through it the tracery of the fore rigging. As for me, I was as panic stricken as a frightened horse. As I had ceased to exist. Through me were vibrating the fiber instincts of 10,000 generations of superstitious forebears who had been afraid of the dark and the things of the dark. I was not, I was in truth, those 10,000 forebears. I was the race, the whole human race in its superstitious infancy. Not until part way down the cabin companionway did my identity return to me. I checked my flight and clung to the steep ladder, suffocating, trembling, and dizzy. Never, before nor since, have I had such a shock. I clung to the ladder and considered. I could not doubt my senses. That I had seen something there was no discussion. But what was it? Either a ghost or a joke. There could be nothing else. If a ghost, the question was, would it appear again? If it did not, and I aroused the ship's officers, I would make myself the laughing stock of all on board. And by the same token, if it were a joke, my position would be still more ridiculous. If I were to retain my hard-won place of equality, it would never do to arouse anyone until I ascertained the nature of the thing. I'm a brave man, I dare to say so, for in fear and trembling I crept up the companionway and went back to the spot from which I had first seen the thing. It had vanished. My bravery was qualified, however. Though I could see nothing, I was afraid to go forward to the spot where I had seen the thing. I resumed my pacing up and down, and though I cast many an anxious glance toward the dread spot, nothing manifested itself. As my equanimity returned to me, I concluded that the whole affair had been a trick of the imagination, and that I had got what I deserved for allowing my mind to dwell on such matters. Once more my glances forward were casual and not anxious, and then suddenly I was a madman, rushing wildly aft. I had seen the thing again, the long, wavering, attenuated substance through which could be seen the fore rigging. This time I had reached only the break of the poop when I checked myself. Again I reasoned over the situation, and it was pride that counselled strongest. I could not afford to make myself a laughing stock. This thing, whatever it was, I must face alone. I must work it out myself. I looked back to the spot where we had tilted the bricklayer. It was vacant. Nothing moved, and for a third time I resumed my amidships pacing. In the absence of the thing my fear died away and my intellectual poise returned. Of course it was not a ghost. Dead men did not rise up. It was a joke, a cruel joke. My mates of the forecastle by some unknown means were frightening me. Twice already they must have seen me run aft. My cheeks burned with shame. In fancy I could hear the smothered chuckling and laughter even then going on in the forecastle. I began to grow angry. Jokes were all very well, but this was carrying the thing too far. I was the youngest on board, only a youth, and they had no right to play tricks on me of the order that I well knew in the past had made raving maniacs of men and women. I grew angrier and angrier,
and resolved to show them that I was made of sterner